They called him the Beast of Belsen. She earned the nickname the Hyena of Auschwitz. 7 names that became synonymous with industrial murder. 7 trials that gripped the world. 7 gallows that waited at the end. Between 1945 and 1971, the Allied powers and Polish courts hunted down the architects of the camp system and made them answer for crimes so vast the numbers barely register as human. Over 850,000 dead at Treblinka, 500,000 signatures on death lists at Birkenau, tens of thousands beaten, starved, gassed, shot at execution walls. These weren't distant bureaucrats signing papers in Berlin. These were the people who stood in the camps, who gave the orders face to face, who watched it happen. And when the war ended, some of them tried to run. Some of them tried to hide. Some of them stood in courtrooms and said they were only following orders. None of it mattered. The evidence was carved into mass graves and burned into survivor testimony. 7 cases. 7 executions that stunned a public only beginning to understand what had happened in occupied Poland. Names you need to know? Crimes documented down to the signature. The cold machinery of how justice finally caught them. If you value documented history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the official trial transcripts held at the Polish Supreme National Tribunal archives in Krakow, published in December 1947, and the British War Crimes Investigation Unit interrogation reports stored at the National Archives in QI, documented between April and November 1945. These aren't secondary sources or popular histories. These are the original documents typed by court stenographers and military interrogators as the trials happened. Now back to the information. Number 1, Rudolf Höss, first commandant of Auschwitz, executed April 16, 1947, age 46. He ran Auschwitz from May 4th, 1944, until November 1943, and then again from May 8th, 1944 to January 18th, 1945, the longest-serving camp commandant in the entire system. The man who tested Zyklon B on Soviet prisoners in Block 11 on September 3rd of Mauer, 1941. The man who wrote in his affidavit at Nuremberg on April 5th, 1946, that he estimated at least 2,500,000 victims were executed and exterminated at Auschwitz by gassing and burning, and at least another 500,000 succumbed to starvation and disease, 3 million dead. His numbers, his signature on the requisition forms for the gas. On June 10th, 1941, Heinrich Himmler summoned him to Berlin for a personal meeting. Hitler had given the order for the final solution. Himmler told Höss that Auschwitz had been selected because of its easy access by rail and the extensive site that allowed for isolation. Höss accepted the assignment. He went back and built the infrastructure for murder at scale. 4 crematoria, gas chambers disguised as shower rooms, a rail spur that brought trains directly into Birkenau. He innovated, he experimented, he increased capacity. When the Hungarian Jews arrived in spring 1944, 437,000 people in 56 days. Höss personally oversaw the selections. Trains arrived. People stepped onto the ramp. Höss or his deputies pointed left or right. Most went left, straight to the gas. The British captured him in March 1946. He'd been hiding under the name Franz Lang, working as a farmhand near Flensburg. Hans Alexander, a British Army captain and German Jewish refugee, tracked him down using intelligence from Höss's wife. They found him in a woodshed. He admitted his identity immediately. At Nuremberg and Justice, he testified for the prosecution. He spoke calmly, methodically, about the killing process. He described how they used Zyklon B because it was more efficient than carbon monoxide. He explained how they burned bodies in open pits when the crematoria couldn't keep pace. He estimated timelines. He corrected other defendants when they understated numbers. The court sat in silence. This wasn't a man justifying his actions. This was a technician describing his work. The British extradited him to Poland in May 1946. The Polish Supreme National Tribunal tried him in Warsaw from March 11th to March 29th, 1947. The prosecution presented documents with his signature. They called survivors who identified him from the selections. They showed photographs of the crematoria he'd designed. Höss sat through it without emotion. His defense was simple. He had followed orders. He had done his duty as a soldier. The court didn't buy it. On April 2nd, 1947, they sentenced him to death by hanging. The execution was carried out 14 days later on April 16th at Auschwitz itself. They built the gallows next to the crematorium of Auschwitz I, the same building where thousands had been burned. Höss walked to the gallows without resistance. No final statement, no apology. He was hanged at the location of the Camp Gestapo, where prisoners had been tortured during interrogations. The message on the memorial board today reads that the first commandant of Auschwitz was hanged here on April 16th, 1947, 3 years from liberation to execution. His autobiography, written while awaiting trial, was published in Polish in 1951 and in German in 1956. He never expressed remorse. He wrote about his family life. He wrote about his career frustrations. He wrote about logistics and quotas. He never wrote about the people he killed as people. Number 2, Amon Goeth, Commandant of Płaszów, executed September 13th, 1946. Age 37, born in Vienna on December 11th, 1908. Joined the Nazi Party on December 1st, 1931. Joined the SS in 1932. By 1942, he was working for Operation Reinhard, the systematic murder of Poland's Jews. In February 1943, he became commandant of Płaszów concentration camp near Krakow. The camp held between 2,000 and 24,000 prisoners, depending on the month. Most came from the Krakow ghetto. Goeth supervised the violent liquidation of that ghetto in March 1943. Witnesses at his trial testified that he personally shot between 30 and 90 women and children during the clearing. He also supervised the liquidations of the Tarnów ghetto and the Sebny labor camp, both in September 1943. His performance pleased his superiors so much that he was promoted 2 ranks to Hauptsturmführer in summer 1943. At Płaszów, Goeth killed randomly and capriciously. Survivors testified that from the balcony of his villa, he used a rifle with a scope to shoot prisoners as they moved through the camp. He had a Jewish dog handler executed because his 2 Great Danes, trained to kill prisoners on command, preferred the handler's company to his own. On his birthday in 1943, he ordered a prisoner named Natalia Karp to play the piano. She performed Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor so well that Goeth allowed her and her sister to live. Days later, he might shoot someone for walking too slowly. The prisoners called him the White Death because of the white linen coat he sometimes wore. Others simply said, when you saw Goeth, you saw death. In September 1944, the SS arrested Goeth for brutality and corruption, specifically for withholding loot from the SS, keeping valuables confiscated from murdered Jews instead of sending them to Berlin. He was held in Breslau until October, then sent to an SS sanitarium in Bad Tölz after being diagnosed with diabetes. American forces captured him there in May 1945. In the chaos of post-war detention camps, he initially disappeared into the prisoner population. But Josef Lukovic, a Płaszów survivor, tracked him down in 1946. Lukovic got other former inmates to identify him. The Americans turned Goeth over to the Polish government. The Supreme National Tribunal of Poland tried him in Krakow from August 27th to September 5th, 1946. The trial lasted 9 days. The charges were membership in a criminal organization and personally ordering the imprisonment, torture, and extermination of individuals and groups of people. He was also convicted of homicide, the first such conviction at a war crimes trial, for personally killing, maiming, and torturing a substantial, albeit unidentified number of people. The prosecution presented witness testimony from dozens of survivors. They presented documents showing Goeth's orders. They presented evidence of mass graves at Płaszów containing thousands of bodies. Goeth's defense was that he was only following orders. He claimed he had authority and permission for everything he did. He argued that the penalties he inflicted, including executions, were within his disciplinary jurisdiction as camp commandant and were in accordance with German regulations. During the trial, Goeth showed provocative indifference. He accepted responsibility for what happened at Płaszów, but insisted he'd been authorized. The court found him guilty on September 5th, 1946. 8 days later, on September 13th, 1946, Amon Goeth was hanged at Montelupic prison in Krakow, the same prison the Gestapo had used throughout the war to torture and execute Polish resistance fighters. The gallows stood not far from the former site of the Płaszów camp. His remains were cremated and the ashes thrown into the Vistula River. One detail that captured public attention was that legendary footage supposedly showing Goeth's execution, with 2 failed hanging attempts before a successful third try. It was later determined to show not Goeth, but Ludwig Fischer, the former Nazi governor of Warsaw. No footage of Goeth's actual execution exists. His mistress, Ruth Irene Calder, remained loyal to him after his death. She kept a portrait of Goeth next to her bed for the rest of her life. In 1983, the BBC interviewed her after the publication of Thomas Keneally's book Schindler's Ark. She defended Goeth as a charming man even while seeing the transcript of his war crimes trial for the first time. She committed suicide by overdosing on sleeping pills the next evening. Goeth's daughter Monica, born in November 1945, never met her father. Her mother told her growing up that he was a good man and a war hero. Monica discovered the truth as a young adult. She suffered a serious nervous breakdown after watching Schindler's List in 1993. Ralph Fiennes received an Academy Award nomination for portraying Guth in that film. Number 3, Josef Kramer, Beast of Belsen, executed December 13th, 1945. Age 39. Born in Munich on November 10th, 1906, into a middle-class family. He joined the Nazi Party on December 1st, 1931, and the SS in June 1932. Before joining the Nazis, he'd worked only casual jobs and was mostly unemployed. The SS gave him stability and a career. He trained as a guard and received his first assignment in 1934 at Dachau, promoted steadily through camps at Sachsenhausen and Mauthausen. In 1941, he was appointed commandant of Natzweiler Struthof concentration camp in Alsace. At Natzweiler, Kramer personally carried out the gassings of 80 Jewish men and women. They were part of a group of 87 people selected at Auschwitz to become anatomical specimens in a proposed Jewish skull collection at the Reich University of Strasbourg. 46 of the victims were originally from Thessaloniki, Greece. Kramer used an improvised gas chamber at Natzweiler. He described the process in detail during his interrogation. He poured Zyklon B pellets through an opening. He watched through a peephole as they died. 86 people murdered for a university collection that was never completed. In May 1944, Kramer transferred to Auschwitz. He became commandant of Auschwitz II Birkenau, the extermination section of the complex. He oversaw the gas chambers. He supervised the selections of Hungarian Jews when they arrived in spring 1944. At the Frankfurt Auschwitz trial in the 1960s, Dr. Franz Lucas testified that he tried to avoid assignments from Kramer. When Lucas saw his name on the list of selecting physicians for a Hungarian transport, he objected strenuously. Kramer reacted sharply. "I know you are being investigated for favoring prisoners," Kramer told him. "I'm now ordering you to go to the ramp, and if you fail to obey an order, I shall have you arrested on the spot." Testimony from Anita Lasker at the Belsen trial revealed that Kramer took an active part in selections. He loaded people into trucks. He beat them when they resisted. He became known among his subordinates as a harsh taskmaster. In December 1944, Kramer transferred to Bergen-Belsen as commandant. The camp had originally served as a temporary holding facility. But during the war, it expanded to hold displaced persons and prisoners evacuated from camps further east as the Soviet army advanced. When Kramer arrived, Bergen-Belsen held 42,000 inmates. On March 1st, 1945, Kramer filed a report requesting help and resources. 250 to 300 prisoners died each day from typhus, he wrote. On March 19th, the number of inmates rose to 60,000. By the week of April 13th, some 28,000 additional prisoners were brought in from evacuated camps. Administration collapsed. Guards fled. Kramer remained. British forces liberated Bergen-Belsen on April 15th, 1945. 63 Anti-Tank Regiment Royal Artillery entered first. They found approximately 60,000 prisoners, many barely alive. They found 13,000 unburied corpses scattered across the camp. They found Kramer, still in uniform, resplendent, full of arrogance. According to British Army Sergeant A.N. Midgley, who photographed him, Kramer met the British troops formally. He expected to be treated as a military officer. Instead, they shackled his feet and arrested him. The British tried Kramer and 44 others at Lüneburg from September 17th to November 17th, 1945. The trial lasted 54 days. Notable defendants included Dr. Fritz Klein, Kramer's deputy Franz Hussler, and female guard Irma Grese. The charges covered crimes at both Bergen-Belsen and Auschwitz. The prosecution presented film footage shot by British forces immediately after liberation. The footage showed the corpses, the mass graves, the walking skeletons. The court adjourned in shock. Over 100 witnesses testified. Survivors identified Kramer from the selections. They described the conditions at Belsen. They described the beatings. They described watching people die of starvation while Kramer walked past without reaction. Kramer's defense was that he'd requested help from Berlin. He claimed he'd worked tirelessly with limited resources to avoid the worst. He blamed his superiors for ignoring his requests to stop further transports into the overcrowded camp. He wrote a letter to Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery asking for clemency. He addressed it as one soldier to another. Montgomery never responded. On November 17th, 1945, the court found Kramer guilty. 11 defendants were sentenced to death. 19 received prison terms ranging from life to 1 year. 14 were acquitted. Kramer and the others sentenced to death were transferred to Hamelin Prison. British executioner Albert Pierrepoint flew over from England to carry out the sentences. On December 13th, 1945, starting at 9:30 in the morning and lasting until 4 in the afternoon, all 11 condemned were hanged. Kramer died at 12:11. He was hanged on a double gallows, 2 prisoners at a time to speed the process. Dr. Klein died alongside him. The executions were conducted with the greatest secrecy to prevent escape attempts or rescue efforts. British and German police mounted guard around the gallows days in advance. The world learned of the hangings the next day. Public reaction was mixed. British audiences were largely pleased, viewing it as justice and a triumph of the rule of law. Germans found the outcome more moderate than expected. 14 acquittals had surprised them. Most had assumed anyone charged would be found guilty. Survivors in other Allied nations, notably the Soviet Union and France, criticized the verdicts as too mild. Kramer was 39. He left a wife and children. He never expressed remorse. Shifting scene: 3 women and 8 men. 54 days of testimony. Film evidence that shocked a courtroom. The world watched because the Belsen trial wasn't just about one camp. It was about Auschwitz, too. The British included Auschwitz charges because so many SS staff had served at both camps. Since Auschwitz was in the Soviet occupation zone, no single Allied power could hold a trial there. But Auschwitz was too notorious to ignore. The prosecution called survivors who'd been in both camps. They testified about the gas chambers. They testified about the selections. They described the crematoria. One defendant, Irma Grese, became the face of female brutality in the camps. Number 4, Irma Grese, the hyena of Auschwitz, executed December 13th, 1945, age 22, born October 7th, 1923, in Recken, a rural village in Feldberger Seenlandschaft, daughter of a farmer, unremarkable childhood, left school at 15, worked on a farm for 6 months, then in a shop, then for 2 years in a hospital. She wanted to become a nurse. But the labor exchange sent her to Ravensbrück concentration camp instead in July 1942. She was 18 years old. At Ravensbrück, she trained as an Aufseherin, a female guard. She learned to beat prisoners. She learned to punish infractions. She learned that in the camp system, brutality was rewarded with promotions. In March 1943, she transferred to Auschwitz. She was 19. By May 1944, she'd been promoted to Oberaufseherin, chief female guard, overseeing Camp C at Birkenau. Camp C held approximately 30,000 Jewish women from Poland and Hungary. Survivors testified that Grese was responsible for at least 30 deaths per day. She carried a whip made of cellophane and a pistol. She beat women until they collapsed. She stood at selections alongside Dr. Josef Mengele, helping decide who lived and who died. On one occasion, during a selection, some prisoners attempted to escape. Grese noticed. She beat the majority with her hands and kicked them with her boots. Survivor testimony at trial described how she tied the legs together of a woman about to give birth and watched her agony. Other testimony described sexual deviance, affairs with male and female prisoners, relationships with Mengele and Kramer. Some of this testimony was reliable. Some was embellished. What wasn't disputed was the violence. Greece loved control. She loved power. Prisoners recalled her riding a bicycle along formations of thousands of women, beating them in the faces as she passed. She was 20 years old. In January 1945, with Soviet forces approaching, she transferred back to Ravensbrück briefly, then to Bergen-Belsen in early March. She served as labor service leader and report leader. She was there for 3.5 weeks before liberation. She'd been assigned to Belsen against her wishes. She wanted to stay at Auschwitz with her lover, Oberscharführer Franz Wolfgang Hatzinger, a married man 14 years older. Fellow guard Johanna Bormann testified that Grese and Hatzinger were very close and regularly sneaked off to have sex. Hatzinger died before the war ended. British forces arrested Grese at Bergen-Belsen on April 15, 1945. She was 21. At the Belsen trial, she faced 2 charges, one for crimes at Belsen, one for crimes at Birkenau, covering the period from October 1st, 1942 to April 30th, 1945. She pleaded not guilty. During the trial, she remained cold, arrogant, unremorseful. When prosecutors showed film footage of the liberation, the decomposing corpses, the mass graves, Grese sat impassive. When survivors testified against her, she glared at them. British soldiers guarding her nicknamed her Jutjaw. She gave terse answers. "I should know better than you whether or not I had a dog, don't you think?" She snapped at one point. "I wish you would stop repeating the word regularly." She told prosecutors when they asked about her repeated violent acts. Her defense was simple. Himmler is responsible for everything that has happened, but I suppose I'm as much to blame as the others above me. Her only moment of vulnerability came when her sister Helene gave character witness testimony, describing a volatile interaction between Irma and their father in 1943. Grese broke down sobbing. It was the only time. The court found her guilty on November 17th, 1945. She was sentenced to death. When the verdict was read, she showed total indifference, then broke into sobs. Later, she was found crying in fear in her cell. Her clemency appeal was denied. All anticipated pleas from the condemned were rejected in advance. On December 8th, affirms to the appeals were formally rejected. 2 days later, she and the others sentenced to death were transferred to Hamlin Prison. On the morning of December 13th, 1945, she was heard sobbing in her cell. At 10:38, Irma Grese was hanged. She was the second woman executed that day, after Elizabeth Volkenrath. Albert Pierrepoint, the executioner, later described the scene. The cell was too small to enter, so he pinioned her in the corridor. She walked to the execution chamber laughing, according to Pierrepoint's account. Another source claims she had to be dragged kicking to the gallows. Her final word was schnell, German for quick. She was 22 years old, the youngest woman executed under British law in the 20th century. After the execution, her personal belongings were handed over to her sisters. Among them were 439 Reichsmarks in cash and a bank book showing a balance of 4,391 Reichsmarks. As a concentration camp guard, single and without children, she would have been paid 186 Reichsmarks per month plus 35 Reichsmarks over time. To put that in perspective, an unskilled female working in the textile industry received just 76 Reichsmarks per month. The SS paid well. Number 5. Arthur Liebehenschel, second commandant of Auschwitz, executed January 24th, 1948, age 46, born in Posen, now Poznan, on November 25th, 1901. Studied economics and public administration, too young to serve in World War I. He enrolled in the Freikorps Grenzschutz Ost in 1919, and later served as a sergeant major in the Reichswehr, joined the Nazi Party in 1932, member number 39,254, joined the SS in 1934. He served in the Totenkopfverbände, the Death's Head unit responsible for concentration camps, became adjutant at Lichtenberg concentration camp, then transferred to the concentration camps inspectorate in Berlin. In 1942, when the SS Economic and Administrative Office was founded, he was assigned to the new concentration camps department as head of one division. On December 1st, 1943, Liebehenschel was appointed commandant of Auschwitz, succeeding Rudolf Höss. He made changes. He removed the standing cells from Block 11. He halted selections to gas chambers among regular prisoners. According to Hermann Langbein, a prisoner at the Auschwitz infirmary, in general, one could establish that even those SS members who were very bloodthirsty before became a bit more reserved because they realized that their fanaticism would not necessarily be tolerated anymore. Liebehenschel's tenure lasted only 5 months. When Höss returned to Auschwitz in May 1944 for the Hungarian operation, Liebehenschel was replaced and transferred to Majdanek extermination camp as commandant on May 19, 1944. At Majdanek, he took over from Martin Gottfried Weiss. The camp was evacuated shortly after because of the Soviet advance. Liebehenschel relocated to Trieste, Italy, working in the office of Odilo Globoknik. He became head of the SS Manpower office there. When the war ended, American forces arrested him. Poland requested extradition. The Auschwitz trial began on November 24, 1947, to workers in Krakow. 40 former staff members of Auschwitz were tried. Liebehenschel was the highest-ranking officer. Also on trial were Maria Mandl, head of the women's camp, and Dr. Johann Kramer. The trial ended on December 22, 1947. The Supreme National Tribunal issued 23 death sentences and 17 imprisonment sentences ranging from life to 3 years. One person was acquitted, Sergeant Major Hans Munk, who had refused to participate in selections and requested more food for inmates. Liebehenschel was convicted of crimes against humanity. The court found that, despite his reforms, he had participated in a genocidal system. He had been commandant during a period when thousands died. He had signed documents. He had maintained the camp. The prosecution argued that improvements within a death camp did not absolve responsibility for the camp's existence. The defense argued that Liebehenschel had tried to reduce suffering. The court acknowledged this, but ruled that it was insufficient. On January 24, 1948, at 7:32 in the morning, Arthur Liebehenschel was executed by hanging at Montelupich prison in Krakow. He was the 5th person hanged that morning. Before him were Hans Aumeier, Maximilian Grabner, Karl Möckel, and Maria Mandl. In total, 21 Nazis were executed that day. Therese Brandl was executed alongside Mandl, making her the 2nd woman hanged. Liebehenschel denied any charge of crime to the end. His daughter later published a book in 2009, My Father, the Auschwitz Commandant. She outlined actions by her father that improved prisoners' lives, but also discussed his participation in a genocidal system. Together with another daughter, Antje, she was interviewed in 2002 by German television about living with their father's guilt. Liebe Henschel had a son by his second wife. His first wife, whom he left during the war, suffered from mental health issues and died by her own hand in a hospital for the mentally ill in 1966. Number 6. Maria Mandl, the Beast of Birkenau, executed January 24th, 1948, age 36, born in Münzkirchen, Austria, on January 10th, 1912, into a financially well-off Catholic family. Following the annexation of Austria by Nazi Germany in March 1938, she moved to Munich and found work as an Aufseherin at Lichtenberg concentration camp. There she subjected prisoners to fatal beatings and floggings. In 1939, she transferred to Ravensbrück and was promoted to Oberaufseherin. In early 1940, she and Dorothea Binz were assigned to the on-camp jail, the punishment block. Prisoners were flogged 25 strikes on their buttocks. Austrian survivor Marco Feingold recalled how he and his brother endured this abuse 5 times per day, 25 strikes each time. In an interrogation after her arrest, Mandl claimed prisoners were only kept in cells for up to a month and were provided with coffee and bread every day. Survivor testimonies contradicted this, describing how food had been withheld. In 1941, Mandl joined the National Socialist Women's League. In April 1942, she was promoted to Oberaufseherin at Ravensbrück. In October 1942, she was sent to Auschwitz to Birkenau. She became Schutzhaftlagerführerin, camp leader, the highest-ranking position for a female guard. Her only superior was Rudolf Höss, who regarded her highly. On March 27, 1944, he gave her a salary increase of 100 Reichsmarks and control of all female subcamps in the Auschwitz complex, including Hindenburg, Lichtenwerden, and Reiskow. She promoted Irma Grese to Oberaufseherin and appointed Therese Brandl as her secretary. In November 1944, she was awarded the War Merit Cross, second class. At Birkenau, Mandl's cruelty continued from what she'd practiced at Lichtenberg and Ravensbrück. When new prisoners arrived, she used a cane to extract expensive items and jewelry hidden in women's vaginas. She actively participated in selections. A list bearing her signature proves that she herself decided who was no longer considered fit to work. Hermann Langbein recalled hearing a conversation between Mandl and the camp doctor for the women's camp, Dr. Kitt. She complained that no selection had taken place for an extended period, and that it was almost impossible to keep order in the women's camp because of overcrowding. Based on the number of death lists she signed, it is believed that she was complicit in the deaths of approximately 500,000 prisoners during her tenure at Birkenau. Survivors recalled that she would go to the children's block, take them on her lap, hand them packages from the dead, then send them to the gas chambers after a few days. Some she escorted personally. Transports from the Soviet Union arrived with children without parents. Mandl would take them in her arms, sing to them, then have them gassed when her interest waned. She withdrew some children from the line to the gas chamber if they turned out to be musical. She ordered the formation of an orchestra at Birkenau. The women's orchestra at Auschwitz consisted of inmate musicians, often spared from the gas chamber. They performed in all weather conditions for hours during roll calls, selections, transports, and executions. Heinrich Himmler admired the orchestra. Dr. Josef Mengele was reportedly brought to tears by some of their music. Mandl loved classical music. She loved power. She loved being mistress of life and death. When groups of women returned from work, they went through a selection at the gate. Mandl held a stick at a height of 50 centimeters. Those who managed to jump over it kept their lives. Those who couldn't make it were sent to the gas chamber. She could beat prisoners for keeping a hand in a pocket, for smoking a cigarette, for rubbing a nose, for tying a handkerchief crookedly, for a handkerchief sticking out of a pocket. She practically never parted with her whip and baton. She could ride a bicycle in front of formations of several thousand women and beat them in the faces at the same time. In December 1944, as the Red Army approached, Mandl escaped. She tried to return to her family home, but her father refused to shelter her. She fled with her lover, Commandant Walter Adolf Langleist, and a Jewish prisoner known as Mose. After evading arrest for 3 months, American military police apprehended Mandl and Langleist in August 1945 at Langleist's home in Hof. She was extradited to Poland in September 1945. The Auschwitz trial began on November 24, 1947. Mandl was convicted of crimes against humanity in December. She wrote an appeal for clemency to Polish President Bolesław Bierut, claiming innocence. Her lawyers attempted to get her pardoned. The request was rejected. In the days leading up to her execution, she spent her time praying and teaching herself Polish. She sought forgiveness from Stanisława Raczkowska, an anti-communist activist who had been imprisoned in Auschwitz and was now incarcerated. The hunt did not end with the executions at Hamelin and Krakow. The machinery of justice, slow and methodical, continued its work across occupied Europe. While the most infamous names had been brought to account, hundreds of others, adjutants, doctors, guards, and bureaucrats who had greased the wheels of the genocide, were still at large, some hid in plain sight, their papers forged, their pasts buried under the rubble of the Reich. Others fled along clandestine routes to South America or the Middle East, but for some, the past had a long memory and an even longer reach. The trials continued, bringing to light new horrors and ensuring that more of the architects of the camp system would face a final reckoning. The names that follow are a testament to that pursuit. They are a continuation of the ledger, a further accounting of the men and women who turned industrial murder into a career. Number 7, Franz Stangl, the ghost of Treblinka, died in custody, June 28, 1971. Age 63. He was the man who perfected extermination as a bureaucratic process. Born in Altmünster, Austria, on March 26, 1908, Stangl was a master weaver by trade before joining the Austrian police in 1931. An early and illegal member of the Nazi Party, he was absorbed into the Gestapo following the Anschluss in 1938. His career in mass murder began not in Poland, but within the Reich itself, at the Hartheim Euthanasia Center. He was the deputy office manager for the T4 program, the secret Nazi project to murder mentally ill and disabled German citizens. It was there, gassing his fellow countrymen, that Stangl learned the logistics of killing. He learned how to process victims, how to dispose of bodies, and most importantly, how to psychologically manage his staff to prevent them from breaking under the strain of their work. He proved so efficient that he was a natural choice for a new, more ambitious project, Operation Reinhard. In March 1942, Stangl was transferred to occupied Poland and appointed the first commandant of the Sobibor extermination camp. He arrived wearing a white riding coat and carrying a whip, establishing an image of immaculate, cold authority. He redesigned the camp's procedures to maximize efficiency. Under his command, Sobibor became a streamlined factory of death, but his true legacy was forged at his next posting. In September 1942, he was made commandant of Treblinka, which had fallen into chaos under its first commandant. Stangl brought his signature administrative rigor to the camp. He reorganized the reception area to look like a real train station, complete with fake timetables and signs pointing to transfers to the east, to deceive arriving victims and keep them calm until the last possible moment. He oversaw the murder of an estimated 900,000 Jews at Treblinka. He viewed it all as a management problem. In a series of interviews conducted by journalist Gita Sereni shortly before his death, he admitted he saw the victims not as people, but as cargo. "Oh, I rarely saw them as individuals," he said. "It was always a huge mess. I sometimes stood on the wall and saw them in the tube. They were naked, packed together, running, being driven with whips. When Sereni asked why he didn't intervene, he replied with the chilling logic of a bureaucrat, 'My conscience is clear about what I did. I was simply doing my duty.' When Operation Reinhard concluded in late 1943, Stangl was transferred to Trieste to help fight partisans. As the war ended, he was captured by American forces in 1945, but his identity as the commandant of Treblinka was not known. He was interned as a simple SS officer. In 1947, he was handed over to Austria to face trial for his role in the T4 program. But in May 1948, too, he simply walked out of a prison camp in Linz and or, with the help of the Vatican-run rat lines, escaped to Italy. Bishop Alois Hudal, a pro-Nazi rector in Rome, provided him with a Red Cross passport and a visa to Syria. Stangl lived in Damascus for 3 years with his family before moving to Brazil in 1951. He found work as an engineer at a Volkswagen plant in São Paulo, living under his own name, a ghost of the Holocaust, hiding in plain sight for 16 years. His peaceful life ended in 1967. Simon Wiesenthal, the famed Nazi hunter, tracked him down. Acting on a tip, Wiesenthal informed the Brazilian authorities, who arrested Stangl on February 28, 1967. He was extradited to West Germany to stand trial. The trial in Düsseldorf lasted from May 13, 1970 to December 22, 1970. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, including testimony from Treblinka survivors. Stangl was charged with the co-responsibility for the murder of at least 900,000 people. His defense was unchanged from the one he held in his own mind. He was only following orders. He had no choice. The court disagreed. On December 22, 1977, He was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. He was sent to a prison in Dusseldorf. 6 months later, on June 28, 1971, Franz Stengel died of heart failure in his cell, just hours after completing his final interview with Gitta Sereni. He was never executed, but justice found him nonetheless, half a world away and a quarter of a century after his crimes. Number 8, Karl Otto Koch, the commandant of Buchenwald, executed April 5, 1945, age 47. His case is unique among this list. He was not executed by the Allies, but by the SS itself. His downfall was not his unimaginable cruelty, but his boundless greed. Born in Darmstadt on August 2, 1897, Koch was a veteran of the First World War. He joined the Nazi Party and the SS in 1931, finding a home for his authoritarian and sadistic personality. He rose quickly through the camp system, serving as commandant of Columbia House Prison in Berlin, then Esterwagen, Sachsenhausen, and finally, in July 1937, the newly built Buchenwald concentration camp near Weimar. It was at Buchenwald that his name, and that of his wife, Ilse Koch, became synonymous with corruption and depravity. Together, the Kochs ran Buchenwald as their personal fiefdom. They lived in a luxurious villa on the campgrounds, paid for with money, embezzled from the SS and stolen from prisoners. Karl Koch ordered the construction of a 250,000 Reichsmark indoor riding hall for his wife. Using prisoner labor and funds diverted from the camp's budget, prisoners were starved, beaten, and worked to death, while the Kochs hosted lavish parties. Koch was known for his special punishments. He invented the practice of tree hanging, where prisoners' arms were tied behind their backs and they were hoisted by their wrists, dislocating their shoulders. But the most infamous legends of Buchenwald centered on his wife, Ilse, dubbed the Bitch of Buchenwald by inmates. Survivors testified that she would ride her horse through the camp, whipping prisoners who displeased her. It was alleged that she selected prisoners with interesting tattoos to be killed, their skin then tanned and used to make household items like lampshades, bookbindings, even gloves. While these specific claims about lampshades were difficult to prove conclusively in post-war trials, the accusation itself spoke to the atmosphere of absolute, morbid power the Kochs wielded. Koch's corruption, however, was his undoing. He embezzled vast sums of money and valuables confiscated from prisoners, wealth that was supposed to go to the Reich treasury. This drew the attention of SS internal investigators. In 1941, he was transferred to command the Majdanek camp in Lublin, but his reputation followed him. In August 1943, SS Judge Konrad Morgan arrived at Buchenwald to investigate rumors of corruption and murder. Morgan uncovered a sprawling network of graft. He also discovered that Koch had ordered the execution of 2 prisoners, Walter Kramer and Karl Pikes, to prevent them from testifying about medical treatment Koch had received for syphilis. Murdering a fellow German was a line even the SS would not allow its commandants to cross for personal reasons. On August 24, 1943, Karl Otto Koch was arrested by the Gestapo. He was tried before an SS court in Munich. The court had little interest in his cruelty toward inmates. That was his job. They were interested in the embezzlement and, more seriously, the murder of the 2 German prisoners. He was found guilty in a final, desperate act. He tried to offer information on a secret anti-Hitler plot he knew of, but it was too late. He was sentenced to death. In the early morning of April 5, 1945, just 1 week before American forces liberated Buchenwald, Karl Otto Koch was executed by an SS firing squad at the very camp he had once commanded. He was shot at the execution range, where thousands of his own victims had died. His execution was not justice for the tens of thousands he tortured and murdered. It was an internal cleansing. A gangster's punishment for stealing from the mob. His wife, Ilse, was acquitted by the SS court, but was later arrested by American forces and sentenced to life in prison at a separate trial. Number 9, Fritz Klein, the doctor of the selections, executed December 13th, 1945, age 57. He stood in the dock at the Belsen trial, a physician who had sworn an oath to do no harm, and offered one of the most chilling justifications for genocide ever recorded. Born on November 24th, 1888, in Fekete-Halom, Austria-Hungary, now part of Romania, Klein was an ethnic German, a Transylvanian Saxon. He studied medicine and completed his military service before settling down as a doctor. He was a longtime member of the Nazi Party. In 1943, despite his age, he was conscripted into the Waffen-SS and posted to Auschwitz-Birkenau in December of that year. At Auschwitz, Dr. Klein's medical training was put to a grotesque new use. He became a Lagerarzt, a camp doctor. His primary duty was not to heal, but to select. He stood on the railway ramp as transports of Jews arrived from across Europe. With a flick of his finger, he decided who was fit for slave labor and who would be sent immediately to the gas chambers. He conducted selections in the prisoner infirmary, condemning the sick and weak to death. Survivors remembered him as a calm, professional figure, performing his monstrous task with the detached air of a physician making a routine diagnosis. He participated in experiments on prisoners and signed countless death certificates, listing false causes of death like heart failure for those who had been gassed or shot. He saw no contradiction between his oath and his actions. In December 1944, as the SS began to evacuate Auschwitz ahead of the advancing Red Army, Klein was transferred to Bergen-Belsen. There, he witnessed the final hellish collapse of the camp system. Typhus, dysentery, and starvation raged unchecked. Thousands of bodies lay unburied. Klein did little to alleviate the suffering. He was present when the British liberated the camp on April 15, 1945, and was promptly arrested. He was forced, along with other captured SS staff, to help bury the thousands of corpses. A famous photograph from this period shows him standing in a mass grave, a stark image of the doctor amidst the dead he had helped create. He was a key defendant at the Belsen trial in Lüneburg, tried alongside Josef Kramer and Irma Grese. On the stand, his arrogance was palpable. When questioned about his role in the selections and how he reconciled it with his medical ethics, he provided his infamous answer. My Hippocratic oath, he stated coolly, tells me to cut a gangrenous appendix out of the human body. The Jews are the gangrenous appendix of mankind. That is why I cut them out. The court was stunned into silence. Here was the logic of the final solution. Articulated not by a thuggish guard, but by an educated man of medicine. There was no remorse, only a profound and twisted sense of professional duty. His defense was futile. The evidence against him was overwhelming. On November 17, 1945, the court found Fritz Klein guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. He was sentenced to death by hanging. On December 13, 1945, he was executed at Hamelin Prison by the British hangman Albert Pierrepoint. He was hanged on the same double gallows as Josef Kramer, the two men dropping to their deaths side by side, a commandant and his doctor, partners in industrial murder to the very end. Number 10, Elisabeth Volkenrath, the overseer of the gallows, executed December 13, 1945. Age 26. She was one of the first to stand trial and one of the first to be executed. Her career traced the well-worn path of female brutality in the Third Reich, from Ravensbrück to Auschwitz to Belsen. Born in Schönau under Katzbach, Germany, on September 5, 1919, Volkenrath worked as a hairdresser before volunteering for service in a concentration camp. Like so many others, she was sent to Ravensbrück, the central training ground for female SS guards, or Aufseherinnen. There she learned the casual cruelty and absolute authority that defined the role. In 1942, she was dispatched to Auschwitz I, the main camp, and later transferred to Birkenau. At Birkenau, she rose through the ranks. She was known for her harsh discipline during roll calls, which could last for hours in freezing weather. She oversaw punishments and participated in selections for the gas chambers. Survivor testimony painted a picture of a woman who wielded her limited power with relish, beating prisoners for minor infractions. In late 1944, she was promoted to Oberaufseherin, or head female overseer, and transferred to the Auschwitz subcamp of Gross Rosen. As the front closed in, she was moved again, this time to Bergen-Belsen in February 1945. At Belsen, she served directly under Commandant Josef Kramer and was in charge of the distribution of bread rations, a position of life and death in a camp defined by mass starvation. She was arrested by the British when they liberated the camp. At the Belsen trial, she was defendant number 3, seated near Irma Grese, her former colleague from Auschwitz. Like Grese, she projected an image of defiance and cold indifference. She denied all charges. She claimed she never beat prisoners, that she had no authority in selections. Her testimony was repeatedly contradicted by a parade of survivors who identified her and recounted her specific acts of violence. When confronted with evidence, she was evasive and argumentative. The prosecution established that as a senior guard at 2 of the most notorious camps in the system, she was intrinsically complicit in the process of extermination. Her signature was on camp documents. Her presence was a daily source of terror for thousands. On November 17th, 1945, Elisabeth Volkenrath was found guilty and sentenced to death. Her appeal for clemency was denied. On the morning of December 13th, 1945, at Hamelin Prison, she was the first of the 11 Belsen convicts to be hanged. At 9:34 in the morning, Albert Pierrepoint placed the white hood over her head and the noose around her neck. She was 26 years old. Irma Grese followed her to the gallows about an hour later. Their executions marked a stunning moment for the public. The image of young women being hanged for crimes of such magnitude was difficult to comprehend, a stark symbol of how deeply the Nazi ideology had corrupted every segment of German society. These names are not relics of a distant past. They are documented verdicts, the final chapter for individuals who chose to become cogs in a machine of unimaginable horror. The trials were more than just retribution. They were an effort to establish a record, to force the world to look at the evidence, the testimony, the documents, the mass graves, and to create a legal precedent that such crimes would never again go unpunished. The hunt for justice was imperfect and incomplete, but for these few, the final accounting came at the end of a rope or the barrel of a gun. Their stories are a vital part of history, a warning etched in court transcripts and carried in the memory of survivors. If you believe this history must be remembered, subscribe and share. It is the only way to ensure the world never forgets.